Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Laurie Kramer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Autism Society of Greater Akron. Thank you for joining us this evening to listen to Sherri Bevan Walsh, our recently retired Summit County prosecutor, talk about her journey with autism with her son, Matthew. Just a few points. We are recording this and hope that everyone will also, those still engage and ask questions. This is meant to be just a kind of what we originally thought about calling these like a fireside chat, because we really want people to just feel like they can ask questions and talk and make this kind of a engaging experience. And we have both people online and in the audience. So we're going to look like we're kind of going back and forth. So let me begin by telling you a little bit about our speaker. We actually have a story together. When I first moved here, my husband met Sherri first, and someone had said, you need to talk to Sherri Bevan Walsh. She has a son with autism. This is back in 2003. And I'm like, she's already the county prosecutor. And I'm like, I'm not calling the county prosecutor. Who does that, And so I did not call the county prosecutor. And then I was at an event and there's the county prosecutor. And I don't remember if you came to me or if I got the guts to talk to you, but I introduced myself and Sherri and I sat down and became fast friends. And she, to this day, she's my first autism mom friend and was kind enough to guide me during sort of our newly diagnosed time. And you've all maybe heard me say this, everything I've ever learned, I learned from other parents, and Sherri's one of those and helped me kind of find resources here in Summit County. So when it was time for, we were talking about sort of speakers, Sherri always comes to mind because you're so good about sharing your story and doesn't mind that and really doesn't mind. She'll tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between, which I've always been like, admire that so much because most of us just don't even want to remember it, much like share it. So she was very willing to talk a little bit about, her experience. And as I've said to Sherri when we were talking beforehand, Sherri is somebody who's always said to me over and over again, try again, try again. And so I've often heard that little voice, try again. And sometimes I try again with my son and it works. And sometimes it still doesn't, but I do think she's been a fantastic mentor and friend. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Okay.
And we're just going to sort of talk and mentor, like I said, just kind of go back and forth and with some questions. And please, again, feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, and we hope that you will. So
All right.
thank you, Sherri, for being
Thank you,
here.
Laurie.
Yeah.
My son is 25 years old now. So and Laurie's son is just
23.
a little bit, 23 years old. And I look all the way back to when he was diagnosed. He was around 3.5 years old. And I didn't know any other moms that had a child with autism. I think there are a lot more connections now, and unfortunately, a lot more kids are being diagnosed with autism. But my son was diagnosed, like I said, he was around 3.5 years old. A doctor said he has autism, and honestly, I didn't even know what that was. I knew almost nothing. My husband and I were Googling when I got home, trying to figure out, is this really bad? Exactly what is this? But one of the memories that has always stayed with me, and it was actually very upsetting, it was probably only a couple weeks after Matthew was diagnosed, I went to a seminar. It was just a one-day seminar, and there was a doctor from Children's Hospital speaking. It was a male doctor, and he was talking about autism. And somebody raised their hand and asked a question about, if their child ever has a child, what are the odds that the children would have autism? And I'll never forget the comment, because he said as his answer, well, when the child has autism, they're never gonna get married, and they probably won't live independently, and they won't go to college. He listed all the things that they wouldn't do. And, to this day, I remember leaving that seminar and driving home and crying the whole way home. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's never gonna be able to live outside of my house. So now we fast forward, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is my son, Matthew. He went to a program at Ohio State. He started in 2018. He spent 5 years at Ohio State in a program that's called TOPS. He lived in an apartment. He took their core classes that they offered, which were, more life skill related classes. He audited one OSU course. every
Mhm.
single semester. He had an educational coach that went with him and sat next to him and took notes, and they modified exams and projects and things like that. But jumping ahead a little bit, after 5 years, he graduated. So looking all the way back to the story of, he'll never be able to live independently. A lot of things changed over the years. And I know that all of our kids are different. Our kids have strengths. They have struggles, and they have different strengths and different struggles. But I will just tell you a little bit more about my son. His strength is he talks really well, although he talks a lot more now than he used to. When he was younger, he didn't talk that much, but he's very verbal and has really good skills in that regard. However, academically, he's pretty delayed. He reads at maybe a second or third grade level, even now, really doesn't write much. For texting, he's learned how to do voice to text. And he's also learned that there's some technology that helps him read, where he pushes something. I don't even know how he does it. He learned it at Ohio State, but it will read a text to him. I didn't even realize that he knew how to do that. He was holding his phone once and he pushed a button and I heard a voice reading a text to him.
But what a great, adaptability thing that
Right,
technology will give you.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and the technology that we have now, while it could be frustrating with my typical child when he was growing up, it's been really helpful. It could be really helpful for a child with autism. And
I think those have been game changers.
Right,
really,
they
for our
have.
kids.
They have. Well, and I think it was a real game changer for us when we sent Matthew to this program. Now, mind you, we were sending him over 2 hours away from home. But thankfully, with the technology, things like cameras, things like Life 360, where we could track his location and see where he's at any
And in his
time.
apartment too, right?
In his apartment,
Yeah.
having the cameras to be able to make sure that things were the way they should be. Even things like we had a camera on that faced the oven to make sure, because he was learning some cooking skills. He knew really very few. And we had a camera on the door, and we got a special lock on the door that we could see on the camera to see that the door was locked, one of those upper latches up high. But the technology has really made a difference, made things easier.
And sometimes harder. I mean, you told me the story one. So we know a lot here. We've talked a lot. There's so many places I could go with this, but so with Life 360, was it that Matthew was on the bus, and when we first got there, and you could tell that he was going around and around and around. But I do want to back up a little bit before we go to Ohio State.
Yes.
So you were telling me, we were talking a little bit about getting ready for this, and I'll just share that someone talked to both you and I actually about this program, and there are several programs. You're telling me 10. I didn't realize there were so many in Ohio now, but they're non-degree seeking for people who may have a little bit or, mild to severe intellectual disabilities, and how that might work. But there are so many more programs than there ever used to be. Colleges, and it looks different, and we know that, but it really is more of an opportunity than it ever used to be. And so we talked a little bit about how you'd gone a few places, and just back up and tell your story a little bit about how we
got to that program.
Both of us, and I knew that wasn't a possibility for Philip, but you thought it wasn't a possibility either for Matthew.
So I think I met the woman first, and I think you had talked to her also. And so I had lunch with a woman who was very familiar with college programs for individuals with developmental disabilities. Her son had attended a program, I think it was in Indiana, and she told me that Ohio State had developed a program. And I told her a little bit about Matthew, and she was very positive and upbeat that Matthew,
never having met our kids.
never having met him, very positive that Matthew could do it. And I remember saying to her, you haven't met my son, and, I think your son probably functions higher than my son. He doesn't really read or write. He's very academically delayed. He doesn't have a lot of independent skills, and the thought of him living somewhere other than my home, it just did not seem possible. So she pushed me, she pushed me, well, check it out, learn more about it, which I did. One of the things that Ohio State does is they have a summer 1 week sessions, kind of like an assessment. And he goes down there, he went down to Columbus, he stayed in a dorm, there were counselors and people that worked for the program. And for the whole week, they had different activities and they had different sessions or meetings with him where they got to know him. And then they gave us, it was probably a 10-page report. It was very thorough. They gave us a report on what they thought he would need to improve upon and work on in order to be part of their program. We did that, it's always in June. I think it's still in June for a week. And we did that a year before he was graduating high school. And so we had our list of what he needed to work on. And then quite honestly, I had my own list as a mother on what he needed to work on. So imagine you're trying to think, okay, if my child is going to be living somewhere else, what am I doing for him that he's going to need to learn to do for himself? One of the first things that came to my mind is his medication. He's on 3 different pills. We have a morning pill case and an evening pill case. He's never filled it. So we started, and I had a home therapist that had a list too, and she worked with him. We started just practicing on filling the pills. Now, again, this is where technology comes into place, because even when he went to the program, I was not real confident that he was going to do it correctly. And we had some caregiver help too, by the way. But what I would do is we would do a FaceTime call and I'd have him hold the phone. So we had to practice FaceTime.
Back to that technology.
Yeah, he would hold the phone over his pill cases and I would look and make sure there were 2 in the morning and 1 in the evening and they were the right colors and all of that. But, the pills were on the list. Showering independently. I mean, just to give you some ideas on really what my son still needed to learn a year in advance. He was showering, but I was still shampooing his hair. He was standing in the shower and I was assisting with that. And I was dumping water because he didn't want to put his head under the faucet. So we were trying to work on that.
That was just a year before.
It was just a year
Right.
before,
Yeah.
so
Wow.
we worked on that. One of the big things that they had recommended is, he needs to increase his stamina, because if he's going to be in this program, he's going to be doing a lot of walking across campus. So we hired a 8th grade neighbor girl who came by the house 3 or 4 days a week, and they went for an hour walk, and they did that his entire senior year.
Wow.
He walked 3 or 4 times a week and really got in really good shape too, as a result of doing that. But cooking, basic cooking, like we weren't talking fancy cooking. We're talking teaching him how to use the microwave and what he's going to make. He made hot dogs in the microwave. He made mac and cheese. He could make a peanut butter sandwich. There were pretty simple things.
We were laughing when we were talking about this because Sherri's mentioning that she has a friend who was really worried about food and sort of the nutrition level.
Right.
And I thought, do they have typical kids? Because we
Right.
both have the younger brothers who are like, have they seen how they eat,
Right.
and my son lives off of macaroni. I almost sent you literally, I come home the other day and Robbie has the macaroni and cheese in the refrigerator. But the point is, he ate it again. Even with that age group, they don't necessarily eat the best. And some of this is making peace with some things about, what is also typical college life when you have, your.
Well,
budget.
one thing, if I could clarify one thing with Ohio State's program, when Matthew was in it or when he started it, they did not have dorm space. Everything has really come a long ways, even since my son started. So Ohio State now has dorm space for the individuals in their program. It's called their TOPS program. So because he wasn't going to be in a dorm, I didn't have the same option with the dining hall, although we were able to do the dining hall for lunches. But I knew we were going to have weekends and evenings where he was going to be in an apartment and he was going to need to know how to make some basic,
Still not a bad
things,
skill,
you know, but still a good skill. And
Yeah.
really, it ended up being a benefit. I think Ohio State really tries to encourage the kids in their program to move into the apartments maybe the last 2 years. It is either a 4-year program or a 2-year program. We chose the 4-year. I mentioned he was there for 5 years and he was only there for 5 years because one of those years was COVID. He still participated during COVID, but they didn't offer nearly what they offered, you know, before COVID. So he ended up staying an extra year. But yes, we worked on all those skills and just really had to sit down and think about, okay, what all, you know, does he need to improve upon? At least good enough, because, you know, there was no expectation that he was going to go off to this program and be fully
All of a
independent
sudden,
before he
right.
got there. Right.
Did he have a roommate there?
He had a roommate, yes, and his roommate went to high school with him, so they knew each other. Equally important, I knew his roommate's mother at least a little bit, because one of the things that I've learned is it's also really important that the families, the parents, the moms, the dads, that the families get along.
100%.
In addition to the kids. One of the other things that I learned is, you know, I think when our child is going to move out and have a roommate, maybe we have these visions about our roommates when we were younger, when we went to college, or when we moved out on our own and lived in an apartment, that we're going to all be best friends. You know, you move in with your friend. What I have really learned that is most important is that the roommates, when they have developmental disabilities, that they don't bother each other. You know, do they have certain behaviors? You know, all our kids have different behaviors. Do they have behaviors that are going to irritate each other? You know, Matthew and his roommate are actually quite different. His roommate is much quieter than Matthew. But they're a good match for each other, and they, you know, they don't do anything that bothers the other, and they're very nice to one another.
I
So it's
totally
worked out
agree
really
with
well.
you on matching people, you know, being together and knowing that that's going to work, because that's like, you know, living together is a lot.
Yeah, it
And
is.
yeah, and we all have had bad roommates too.
Right,
You know,
exactly. Yeah.
college years with Lord knows what.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a good point as well. Why don't we pause and is anybody either online or in the audience have any questions up
So
to this
far,
point? Yeah.
Yes.
Feel free, again, you can either unmute. I tried to give everybody the ability to unmute. Or you can put it in the chat.
You said that he's done the 5 years now. Is he still living with the same roommate?
Yeah, so the question was, from the audience, is Matthew done with the program? Is he still living with the same roommate? He graduated in May of 2023. So almost a year ago. He is still living with the same roommate. To back up a minute, his roommate actually graduated after the 4 years. So he had a different roommate his 5th year, and that worked out fine too. It was a very different experience. His roommate in his 5th year was a lot more social. He would just tell Matthew, let's get on the bus, and they would just go to the movies, and they would just kind of do things on a whim.
Wow.
It was a little bit out of my comfort zone
Yeah.
some of the time, but
Yeah.
it was really good for Matthew. But he is living with the original roommate now. They are living right downtown Hudson, in a condo, and they're able to walk everywhere. Although Matthew's roommate got his driver's license a year ago, so he drives, but my son does not drive. But they're able to, you know, go anywhere. It's a really good location for them. And then Matthew is working part-time at my husband's law firm, loves working there. And then he's going to a program that people are probably familiar with called Teammates. He's doing that twice a week. And then has quite a long list of different social activities and things he does on other days.
Yeah, he works out, doesn't he?
He works out with a personal trainer 3 days a week. And he And I know,
I know,
and he
I
never
know.
cancels. Yeah. The reason he's doing that is because my husband had a lot of sessions that he just hadn't used and they let him transfer them to Matthew, who's a lot more committed. No, sorry. My husband's not online.
Right?
I-
I know. I won't be on top of it.
He also does a Zumba class twice a week
Yep.
as well. Yeah.
And so you've done a really good job, though, of restructuring his life here, really,
Yeah.
because, Matthew needs that structure just as
Yes.
much as all of our kids do. And I think, we had talked about, you kind of had to restructure and living on his own in a condo.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Let me back up for a minute because it was something we had talked about previously that I wanted to share. When we, I guess when I say we decided, because really it was my husband and I decided that we wanted Matthew to do this program. Matthew wasn't saying to us, I really want to go to college. I really want to leave home. He wasn't saying any of that, but we were talking very positively about, hey, all your cousins went to college. We'd like you to have the same college experience that and he knew all his cousins had gone to college. His sibling was younger. And so when we applied and he got accepted and we just told him he was going. And I don't know that we didn't really feel like he had any opinion one way or the other. Like he wasn't saying, I don't want to go, but he wasn't talking much about it. So when the time came, when we drove to Columbus and we moved him in,
It's a great story.
and and I just was like, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, like it's kind of like sending your 8-year-old away. I mean,
You're like,
from a
"What am I
maturity
doing?"
standpoint,
Yeah.
people I think sometimes think that my son must have functioned very high if he went to this program, but really I felt like he was still 8 years old, 9, maybe 10. I mean, he still acted very young and had a lot of skills that he still needed to obtain. So we moved him all in and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is just going to be awful when we leave. And I wasn't sure how he was going to react, if he was going to say, don't go, or you can't leave me here. I don't know what to do. So it's finally time to go. And I said to Matthew, and I'm trying to keep it together. And I'm like, okay, Dad and I are driving back to Hudson now, but you know how to call us on our phone, and I'm trying to be real calm. And I say goodbye, and he says to me with a big smile, this is what I've been waiting for. I was like, what? He just like, we're leaving. And his response is, this is what I've been waiting for.
Right. And you're thinking, oh my gosh.
I was like so
He's
caught
gonna
off guard by
say,
that. I mean,
yeah.
there were no tears. There was like this big smile. And honestly, we drove all the way back to Hudson from Columbus and I didn't cry at all. I just thought he was actually excited and
Excited.
told me like, goodbye.
Yeah.
And
And when he would come back, he would want to go back.
when he
too.
came back,
Was like,
all
"I'm
he
ready
would
for
do was say, I want to go back. And, he
A
would,
typical college student.
yeah, he was like a
I
typical
don't want to be home.
college student. He would
Right.
complain in the summer that he missed Ohio State. And then,
Yeah.
I mean, to this day, if he were sitting here
Yeah.
next to me, he would say, I want to go back to Ohio State.
Yeah.
He still talks about it. He still misses it. He's been all over me because we have not gone back and visited. We are going to go back and visit because he still calls the teachers on the phone and
Yeah.
chats with a couple of the teachers that work for the program.
That's
He
really
just
cool.
calls them and they take his calls and calls them on the weekends and the evenings, and he catches up and tells them what he's been doing. But the lesson, I guess, for me is that, he actually really felt good about himself. And I think as a mom, especially when you had a very challenging, and Matthew was very challenging, especially behaviorally for many years. When you've had that challenge, you kind of don't even think about the fact that they actually can feel good about themselves. Like he didn't express himself well enough for me to even think that he would feel proud. It wasn't really an emotion that I would have attributed to him, that he would feel proud. But once he was in the program at Ohio State, every time he would see family, he would say, I'm in college. I'm a college student, and I'm doing really well. I'm not living with my parents, like he
he
just
told me
thought it
that.
was super cool that
Right.
he lived away, from mom and dad.
Which he is cool.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I agree with you. I don't know that either one of us could have anticipated that.
No,
Yeah.
no. And the other thing, I said early on, he's always been very verbal,
Yeah.
but his communication skills are probably 10 times better since he's been there. And I think a lot of it, maybe I'm wrong, but I tried to figure out how does he talk so much better? Because he wasn't having individual speech therapy in their program or anything like that. But he likes to talk and he likes to talk on the phone to people. He's not much of a texter. So because he was far away from everybody he knew, he called everybody on the phone all the time. So he would have all these telephone conversations. And I think that's a part of why he communicates better. And certainly some of the classes and things that the program did, the program had some really good skill based classes where they worked on things with him.
And I think what you've told me too is how much he's connected more emotionally with himself. So communication, yes, but also identifying how he feels or identifying how you might feel. Like you were telling me, he's asked you, how are you, Mom?
Well, so as Lori mentioned early on, I am recently retired and Matthew understands that I'm not working anymore. And it was really interesting because my last day of work, and he knew which day was my last day. So he called me on the phone and he said, Mom, are you officially retired? First of all, I never heard him use the word officially before. So I thought that was a big word. And I was like, well, yes, I am. And he said, well, how are you feeling about it?
Yeah.
And I don't recall him, and this was just a month ago, I don't recall him ever saying, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
And so
which is
that,
pretty-
that really kind of got to me. And I said, well, Matthew, I'm feeling a little bit sad, but I think it's going to be good. And, and then we kind of actually talked about that a little bit. So,
That's such maturity.
right.
It really is.
Years ago, and you and I have talked about this, Lori, years ago, I remember reading, and I don't know if people still read that or if it's just, I've been at this for a long time, but they would say things like, you got to hurry and your child needs to learn all these things because by age 8 or I don't know, 8, I remember 8 years old, they're going to stop developing or something, and we're frantically trying to get therapists and things because everything's going to stop. Well, Matthew's 25 years old and he still uses new words and has new skills and does different things. So for those who have younger children, I mean, there is so many years of growth that it doesn't all just stop. They keep learning.
They keep learning. And I think, and Tiffany, I did see that your hand was up. Would you like to ask a question or was that an accident? Feel free to either unmute or you could put it in the chat. Like she's able to. Well, and I agree with you that I've even talked sometimes maybe about different disabilities, but I find that autism parents, for lack of a better way of putting that for us, we are intense because we do continue to expect more and want them to have more opportunities and try different things. And, the definition of developmentally delayed, right, is like, well, wait a minute, maybe can't do that now, but maybe can do that a couple of years from now. Right. So, and I think sometimes other disabilities, maybe those parents might have an intensity a different way, but I feel like that's kind of something that I noticed with parents. Lisa, would you like to, we'll unmute you? And you can just say it, or we could put you in the chat, whichever way to ask your question. And Tiffany has a question too, so.
Do you want me to go first? Okay.
Yes. All right, we hear you.
Go ahead.
Hello. Can you, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about, my son is 4 and he is in preschool. So can you kind of talk a little bit about Matthew's schooling and any problems, any tips, any suggestions that you have? That would be super.
Okay. Well, a lot has changed, obviously, from age 4 to now. You know, one of the things that I think, and you know, it's always hard because our kids are different, but one of the things that we've always done with Matthew is we've tried to just give him as many different experiences as possible. I mean, I do feel that he's very adaptable, which
Yeah.
is not always a strength when it comes to autism. So we traveled a lot. We had some pretty awful flights, some awful car drives, you know, screaming, and, you know, he had a lot of behavioral issues. But although it would have been easier maybe sometimes just to stay home, we just kept doing it, you know, and it just eventually
He
got
became
better.
desensitized.
Yeah, he just
probably.
kind of, yeah. And so I do feel like, you know, from an early age, we took him a lot of places. We also, from a fairly early age, I think he was only 8 maybe, started having him go to Akron Rotary Camp for respite weekends where he was away from us.
Mhm.
I think that encouraged some independence. And as he got older, he would go for a whole week in the summer. And, you know, and that's not the easiest thing for parents to do.
Yeah, the only reason
you
I ever
know?
did it because you encouraged me to, you remember that?
I encourage Lori
Yeah.
to do
I was
it.
like, I'm not doing
I
it.
have more than one friend that I encourage to do it, but, you know, I think just trying to get them used to different things, you know, will help in the long run. We also, from the time he was 4 years old, we always had a home tutor that worked with him as well. Probably, gosh, and then we had the same one from 2nd grade all the way till he graduated from high school, and she would come 3 days a week for 2 hours a day. She would come like after school and try to work with them. But we spent a lot of time working with him on reading because he just was not a reader. He did get better, but he still, even to this day, doesn't read real well, but he's able to kind of make up for it with some of his language skills. But I do think just keep, you know, I think it's really important if something doesn't work to keep trying, to try other different, you know, different types of therapy. Just keep working at it because it can be a really slow process. But I'm telling you, I wouldn't have ever thought, well, certainly not when Matthew was 4, but I wouldn't have even thought it when he was 12 or even 15 years old that he would ever be able to go to this program in Columbus and live there for 5 years. So
Could I give some other advice that you gave
yes,
me?
yes.
Set expectations. Remember the movie theater thing? So
yeah.
similarly, I was like, Philip could not go and see a movie. And you were like, well, what are you expecting the whole movie? And I'm like, well, what does everybody expect? And Sherri said, well, let me tell you what a teacher told me. And at that age, 4 or 5, 6, 7, that's might have been in that range of
Yeah.
almost backing it up and saying, okay, if we do a movie for 10 minutes this time, that's okay. End on a high note. So even for going back to that age,
And that's exactly, well, so what happened, you know,
expectations,
it's
yeah.
funny because I forgot about that, but that was the one therapist we had asked me, like, you know, what we said, I would really like to be able to take our whole family to a movie, and just because he just would act out so much. And so she's like, well, let me work on that. And so the very first time she says, I'm going to take him to the movie theater. So she calls me afterwards and she says, it went great. And
Oh,
I'm
that's
like,
right, that's
I was like, he watched the whole movie? I was like, oh my God, you know, like to me, I'm thinking if it went great, except for 2 hours. You know?
Right.
And she goes, no, he lasted 10 minutes. And she was really excited. And I was like, all right, I have got to work on my expectations because I would not have been all excited that this was a success because he lasted 10 minutes. And then our home therapist said, and she goes, I think he'll do 15 the next time. And that's really how she did it. They would just keep going and they would go a little longer and a little longer until they watched the whole movie. And so that was really just great advice.
And letting
Yeah.
go of some things. Somebody said the same thing to me with Thanksgiving. Like their kid eats like pretzels, and I thought, boy, and I only got that advice a couple of years ago to let it
Right.
go.
Yeah.
And I thought, boy, I wish somebody told me that when he was
Yeah.
4. Just accept that Thanksgiving for him is pretzels.
Right, right.
So yeah, some of this is us, you know.
Yeah.
So Christy, did that help? I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
But we could do stories like this all day,
Right.
but we'll go to Tiffany so that she can ask her question. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Yep. And actually, my question sort of is like Christie's. My son is 9 and he's been diagnosed with autism level 1 and ADHD about a year and a half ago. And we are having a lot of behavioral issues. It's not nearly as bad than what it was when he was first diagnosed. But I can relate. He also can't express his emotions well. So I think that's why he goes from 0 to 200 because he's just so overwhelmed with what's going on inside and he doesn't know how to express it besides just aggression. So I guess my question is because even though the times are different, I feel like we got the set of papers that your kid has autism and they sent us on our way with nothing. So it's very isolating as parents and to look for hope that he could go away to college and he's not going to be here forever. It's very hard to stay optimistic when you're in it in the beginning.
We get
So I
it.
guess what other suggestions would you have when you're in that state as some advice you'd give?
And my son, I think, had way worse behavioral issues than Lori's son, for example. In fact, of all my friends that had children with autism, I don't know that any of the other kids had the behavior that my son had. I will share my son's behavior didn't actually get, well, it kind of went in spurts. It was very difficult as a toddler. It was a little better. And then it was very difficult again for a number of years, like puberty. But what the worst thing that happened, and it's interesting now because he remembers it and he has a horrible scar and he still talks about it. But now instead of the anger, he's embarrassed. And he says, I don't want people to see the scar and ask me what happened because I'm embarrassed. And he actually uses the word, it's embarrassing to me. He had a meltdown about something. I don't even, there were so many of them that I don't remember what it was. But he ran into the family room and he put his entire leg through the family room window, like his knee went all the way through, and then he pulled it back out. He had about 30 stitches in his knee. Our other son was 12, so Matthew was 15. Our other son was 12, and I was trying to stop it from bleeding, and our 12-year-old had to call 911 to get an ambulance.
Oh my gosh.
But I'll tell you what, it like shook up Matthew. It just, shook him up. But I guess it's so hard. And I will tell you, enough years have passed that the memory is fading, like a memory that I never thought would fade of all our years of behavioral problems. I did find for me, it definitely helped for me to see somebody. I saw what was the same behavioral psychologist, but I had like my own sessions where she worked with me and we would go over the different things that were happening. I had to really work on keeping my staying calm, which that is like the hardest thing to do. There are just times you just like lose it where you just like want to blow, and just start screaming,
Right.
This can't be happening. How could this be this difficult? But it passed, I guess I don't have great answers in the moment because I do know how hard it was.
Yeah.
But, I have a kid now that had pretty severe behavioral issues over and over. I was just telling, who was I telling? I was just telling somebody recently, now that I'm retired, I'm starting to try to get my house in order, which, but we have like holes in walls still and cracked doors, all from him just like hitting doors and walls and things like that. And he does none of that now. None of it. He's more like, expressive. He still will get frustrated at times, but there's no aggression anymore. He is still on some medicines, and I know after he put his knee through the window, the doctor had added a medicine that, seemed to really help, and I know there's a lot of different ones out there. We're trying to cut back on some of them now, and so far, it's been about 2 weeks on half a dose of one of his medicines. Everything seems okay.
You did tell me.
We're trying to wean off of that, but I think there's a lot of hope. And, if my son is an example of a kid that was really, really challenging, who ended up going away and having a great college experience, did all kinds of fun things. I will share too, his senior year, one of the things he did that he's still really proud of and talks about, they did a service trip over spring break. He rode in a van with one other young man with autism, and there were two social coaches or peer mentors and one of the teachers from the program. And they went down to South Carolina and they stayed in a house and they volunteered at a VA hospital. And it was like a 10 or 11-hour trip. Like, I can't even imagine. I'm guessing he claims he didn't complain the whole way down. When are we going to get there? But he still talks about how he did that trip, and he'll say it with no parents.
With no parents.
I went on a
Totally
trip
about
with no
that.
parents. So,
Tiffany, if I could just add something to this, watch Lisa's webinar in a couple weeks. Lisa Thompson's here with me, our director of programs, and Lisa's a big advocate for a program that is social emotional regulation. And that might be even a good segue to something we were talking about before we turn the camera on, but she's going to talk about what she did with her son to help him identify emotions. And I'll just say with my son, and it's funny because I remember our conversations, I kept thinking Philip would eventually talk more like Matthew. We would talk about this.
yes.
And you would even say, yeah, but sometimes he talks too much, or,
Right.
we would have these but then there's that, but I think what I also know is Philip doesn't have as strong of opinions. And I think that that's where your kids are more frustrated.
Yeah.
Because they have definite opinions and they want to be heard. And I'm not sure Philip just doesn't like to make choices, and he just sort of avoids opinions. And I think, my talk is not next week, but the Monday after, and I can talk a little bit more about some of the ways I've seen him grow since he's moved out, including wanting to make more choices.
Right.
But that's a fairly new thing for him. So,
Yeah.
back to how they're different and they have these different stages of things. But I did want to mention that
I
because
think that one of the keys was sharing what she said was that word expectations. And I think really adapting yourself and your world to your child and looking at what their strengths are and how they operate. And that just makes all the difference in the world, I think, in the way your outlook is on life. And, inclusion, it means something different to everyone. For my son, he wants to be included with people who have disabilities, because those are the kids he understands. That might not be the same for the next person, and that's okay. And I think we all just need to get in that mindset where all of these things are okay.
right. And I do think that even, the change with that as well, sometimes the pendulum's gone too far. And we've talked about that with housing. We want our kids to be in housing where they're with their peers.
Right, right.
Even things like that, and saying it's okay to be with our peers. And we had a young man participate in our teen program who's very verbal, and, he's probably level 1 autism. And he said, I like the teen program because I can practice, and I can practice with people who aren't going to be mean and they're not going to judge me. And if I have a hard time, it's okay. And that has really been, I never thought of it. I wouldn't have thought of it that way necessarily. I know,
Right.
our teen group has been a number of things, but to hear him articulate it, I was like, wow, that is an interesting point. It's like
But I think I would say the same thing.
a safe place. Right.
Surround yourself with the people who.
And who hold you up. I mean, I
Exactly.
think we started this up with Sherri and I being, autism mom friends, and many a time we're like, oh my gosh, telling a story, just to have somebody else go, yeah, I have that similar story.
Yeah.
Just somehow makes you feel not quite
It is
alone.
really, when you have a child that's aggressive and very challenging behavior, it is really isolating.
Yeah.
It's very, I don't know, you feel defeated because you just feel so helpless, like, oh my gosh, no matter what, he just blows up at different things.
For us, it was self-interest. And then it
Yeah.
was also the family dynamic, because the husband wanted to approach it one way, and then you got grandma in there who lives with us, and that was a whole different approach. And
Okay.
so,
Online, can you hear our?
Can you hear some of the other conversation?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
good.
very
I know,
clear.
I wasn't
And
sure
I
if I should
100%
repeat.
agree with husband and wife want to do something different. So it definitely
Problem.
adds
Mhm.
a lot
Yeah.
of stress with my husband and me, for sure.
Us too.
My husband thinks that he should be a normal child. Why can't he be a normal child?
Yeah.
If he'll do something and he'll get in trouble for it, and my husband wants to be like, why can't you do it this way? And then I have to say, oh,
If he could, he would.
can't,
Right.
like, if he could do it, he would. Like, I know that it's in his mind, if he wanted, if he could do it, he could do it. But a lot of times, we get into arguments because, you know, my grandson will do something and my husband will blow up and the whole house is in a big uproar, and he's looking at me like, what did I do? Like, I don't even kind of comprehend what I just did to get in this much trouble. And then I'm yelling, he's yelling, everybody's.
Yeah. That, I think one of the big things that I really had to work on with my son is if I lost my cool at all, which I'm telling you, it's really hard not to, like if I kind of started yelling or raising my voice, it just made things worse. And so just trying to practice a calm voice and the face.
Yeah.
And, the one thing I always remember a behavioral psychologist telling me, because when he was really young and I would just like get really mad or I would start crying because I would be so frustrated, and then he would laugh. And I would be like, my kid is laughing at me when I'm upset. And the psychologist said, well, she goes, let me try to imitate what your face looks like when you're yelling or something. Your face is all distorted. And she goes, for someone with autism who's struggling to communicate, you look funny. They don't understand your tone or the tears or maybe the emotions, but they certainly can read that look on your face and it's all distorted. And I thought that was interesting. It actually made me feel a little better. I'm like, all right, at least there's some logical explanation for why he's laughing when I'm losing my cool and I'm just like irate or crying or, something like that. I think that the biggest thing I would say to those of you though, with younger children is, things do improve with everybody I know who had behaviorally challenging kids, whether it be through trial and error with some medicines that helped, just maturity, maybe improved communication. There are a lot of things that can change. It may not happen all the time as fast as we would like it to happen. But with those people that I know that I shared stories with before that had the behavior, it does get better. And certainly in our case, it, completely, got better. Now, like Lori said, probably the most frustrating thing to me now, and then I feel guilty, is my son, still has some, anxiety. And when he's really anxious, he just never stops talking. And it gets really exhausting. And then you feel bad, feeling frustrated that he's just talking on and on and on and on, because there was a time when he didn't talk that much, and you wanted him to talk,
I remember bike camp, when he fell off his bike, he kept saying, Mom, I fell off the bike. I know, get back on the bike. Mom, I fell off the bike. I know, get back on the bike.
But you're right, he kind of self-talks.
Yeah. No, Matthew kind of like calms himself by just saying things like over and over and over. And of course, one of the big things that they work on, I know in Ohio State's program, is, they work on self-advocacy. They want the kids to express themselves and say what they want and how they're feeling. And Matthew has no problem advocating for himself, like to the extreme. Just if he wants to do something and I say, no, we're not going to do that, he'll still bring it up like 50 times over and over, like to wear me down. Some of these kids are good at wearing you down.
I've seen that. He could be good at that, but he's so
Oh,
clever and he loves
yeah.
to dance.
Right.
And that's awfully fun about, and yeah, Matthew loves polka.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think he's something that is really fun about Matthew is, and you know, like dancing, like you're the only person in the room.
Right.
He really is all that. He really is all that. And that's awfully fun. Well, are there any other questions? Actually, believe it or not, we're just about out of time. We have about 6 minutes, but I don't know if anybody else has any more questions for Sherri.
I do, I have one quick one.
Yes.
We struggle with transition a lot. I know a lot of the younger, the people that Dominic goes to school would say the same thing, transition is awful. Is there any advice you can give with transition? Because, you know, when it's time for bed, it takes, you know, we've started now 45 minutes before he goes to bed because it takes that long before he transitions to go.
To go to bed.
Is there any?
That is a struggle. And I'm trying to remember, do you have any thoughts? Like,
Warnings, but it sounds like you're already doing that.
Yeah,
10
just kind
minutes
of,
and we gotta go to bed.
right,
5
Yeah.
minutes, so we gotta go. I had to give a lot of heads up and then I would give a transition object. So we had, when he was little, it's Winnie the Pooh, he would, you know, but that changed over time that he would go to bed with. And then a routine, like all of us who need a routine. So you have a snack and then, I don't know, yeah, just really making it,
you know,
it's
If
very
we're not eating
red.
dinner at 6 o'clock, it's a problem. If we're not having a snack at 7:30, that's a problem. If we're, you know, taking a shower at 8:03 instead of 8 o'clock, you know, the whole night is just ruined, you know, and even tonight, when I came here, he was like, what time are you gonna be home? What time are you gonna be home? You know, I have to have my snack at 7:30. What do you want me to do?
Okay.
I don't have my.
It's
snack
become an
at 7:30?"
anxiety
Like,
point.
Yeah, he's already so anxious that I know when I walk through the door, he'll be just crazy because it's not on.
The schedule.
see, and that's what, you know, that the schedule thing always has been kind of tough for me because on one hand, if Matthew has a set schedule, he'll do better. But if we, you know, it's really hard as
If you skip
parents,
something or-
okay, it's really hard as parents to have everything scheduled all the
Yeah.
time. And I think it then ultimately is also hard for transitions or for changes if you're used to being on a schedule and
Yeah.
then you have to change things around. So, you know, my husband was always a little bit better. My husband, here's one of the things my husband still does to him sometimes. So if we're going somewhere and the example, we would go, you know, a certain way, like we're going home and there will be a set way we would go. My husband sometimes will take a different turn, you know, and even like now Matthew will say, that's not the right way. And he'll go, we're going to change it up. We're going to go a different way. And Matthew's like, but I don't want to go a different way. That's not the way we always
Purposely
go.
have to do that
So
too.
my husband's a
Yeah.
little better at purposely
Yeah.
doing something different, even though it definitely causes some anxiety. And Matthew doesn't like it. And so I have a harder time doing that because I don't feel like dealing with the consequence of doing it. But it's not a bad idea. So, you know.
Sometimes we as parents don't push our kids like to that boundary. You know, because we are, we deal with enough of
Right,
that.
you have to deal with the consequence, yeah.
Right.
Really want more than they do, you know, so
But there is
Exactly.
truth to that, that you don't want to be, can't be served, because life's not like that.
Right.
I think in closing, I think that's, what were we saying before? That was, some things that are, we talked about looking to the future. What are things that to always kind of keep in mind? So one, the suggestions, we were talking about this before. One was building stamina, which you've talked about. Two is self-regulation, learning how to regulate or teaching them and working with them to regulate themselves, I think was a biggie that we talked about. I wish too, we talked about this one a little bit, when to go from academic to functional skills. You know, you do that IEP meeting every time and you keep thinking, but when do I stop doing academics? And that's a tough one. I remember going through a hard time with
Yeah.
that. I wish I had started it sooner. Having said that, I wish I had started it sooner. So those are some three that come to mind very quickly, much less the living skills like
Mhm.
dishes and, you know, whatever those little
Right.
things can be. Any I'm not thinking of as we
I would say reducing prompts.
Oh, there's another one, reducing prompts. Yes.
Because when they're out in the world, if they can't do a job, nobody's gonna be there to
Yeah.
prompt them.
To prompt them every step of the way, and they can become so prompt dependent, and that's a negative too. Yeah.
Matthew still has a little bit of, he has a little bit of an issue with that
Prompt
still,
dependency.
the prompt dependency, where he could do things, but he, verbally will say, what do I do next? Even though he knows, he wants to constantly hear like that feedback
That
that
feedback, yeah.
that he's doing it
Well, our
right.
kids were the
Yeah.
ABA generation.
Right,
Pretty
yeah.
intensely too,
Mhm,
so I
yeah.
think they're mixing that up. But I,
And also teaching them to self-check themselves rather than somebody
Mm.
else coming along and seeing whether their work is complete, helping them do that
To learn to
themselves so that they
self-check.
can. That's what I was gonna say, Andrea. I wonder if, teaching to do his own snack at 7:30. So having him prepare the snack.
He's getting better at it.
That way it's 7:30 and he knows I do it myself.
Now he'll go to the freezer, and he'll pull out the ice cream, pull out a bowl. Can't scoop it himself, but he can pull it out, and he'll say, okay, it's 7:30, it's time for my snack. So he's getting
He is
there,
getting
it's just,
Well, and I think, I've talked about that with various other, as we call it, autism moms. We do get used to doing a lot. And at some point, it's just, a lot of times it's quicker, okay, less, fighting or whatever. When I would try to push Matthew to do something that he wasn't confident in doing, he would have a meltdown. So I'm just like, all right, I'm just gonna do it. But I think reminding ourselves as time goes on that we need to start stepping back from what we're doing. And that's not, we were kind of pushed to do that because we wanted him to go to this program and we knew we weren't going to be right there. But even if you're not about to send your child, to live somewhere else, in some
right.
type of
backing it up a little
college
bit.
program or whatever,
Yeah.
any opportunities you have to enhance their independence is going to be a good thing. And just reminding ourselves as parents, let's at least see if they could do things. You never know for sure what they're capable of doing. I had shared with Lori, and I'll be really fast because I know we're really about out of time, but Matthew had a situation, he only had one problem really at Ohio State that was scary, where he got left somewhere. He had gone with some friends and they took the bus and somebody thought he had a ride and he didn't. And he was a long way from his apartment. He had his phone with him, but his phone died. And, lesson on that for everybody who has a child with phones, like Matthew didn't know numbers because he would just hit mom, so he now has a laminated little card in his wallet that has, people's names and phone numbers. He also didn't know who to approach to like borrow a phone. The kid walked home. It took him 2 hours from where he was. And I don't know how he knew how to walk home, by the way, as an example of some of these kids actually know more than you would ever think they know. I just, can't believe that. But, again, just any opportunities we have to try to give them, just more
Tools.
chances to try something. Maybe they can't do it, but maybe they can. Like, we don't always know what they can and can't do.
Yeah, I think that's good advice to end on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Sherri, for always sharing your
Yep.
story and feeling willing to do that. You do me a favor, reach in my purse. We got a little autism. We got one of our pens for you.
Oh,
I did want to mention that we have several more of these. I'll be talking about same time, same bat station, my son's experience moving out of our family home last year, and a lot of people have wanted to talk about. Thank you. These are
I
just
saw that pin
You
on
look
you and I
like
thought it's so
a-
pretty. Hey, Lori, can I add one
Yeah.
resource for anyone who is interested in learning more about some of the college types of programs? There is a website, it's called Think College. Just Google Think College, and there's a map, and you could see Ohio, and you could click on Ohio. There are 10 different programs in Ohio. Florida has 26 programs, California has 22, Wyoming is the only place in the country that has none at this point. But there's information on all the different programs. It just tells you what some of the requirements are, how long it is. It tells you some costs of the program, and it's very informative.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We also can send out a PowerPoint that TOPS sent us,
Yeah.
if you're interested in the TOPS program that talks a little bit more about that program. But so anyway, we all throughout the month of April for Autism Acceptance Month, we have a number of things going on. So not only the speaker series, but also we're going to do a family swim out in Medina. We've got jumping on Sunday, you know, one of those jump type places. What's it called? Got air, get air. A number of different events that'll be going on. So go to autismakron.org and you can click and see the whole page
We'll
full of
actually send it
things.
out.
Oh, okay. Lisa's saying she'll send it to everybody as a follow-up. Okay,
Okay.
perfect. So we'll
Good.
send all that as a follow-up and your feedback is always welcome as well. So thanks again for joining us this evening. Good night, everybody.
Good night.